Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a really fascinating and I think deeply important look at the business of what we eat. We're going to be immersing ourselves in the UK's Farming Profitability Review, which it tries to lay out nothing less than a new deal for profitable farming.
And this deep dive is driven by a really emotional core. When the leaders of this review, when they went out and spoke to farmers, the feedback wasn't just about grants or subsidies. One farmer said, "All I want is to feel valued for being a farmer." Another was even more blunt, he said, "Put the grape back into British food."
Hmm.
So the review recognized that if we want to restore British farming's pride, we have to restore its ability to make money.
Exactly. And that's our mission today, to analyze how the review actually proposes to do that. We're going to examine the huge barriers farmers are facing, from crippling costs to just total policy uncertainty, and then we'll unpack the systemic recommendations. The ultimate goal, as the sources state, is to treat profitability and environmental stewardship not as conflicting goals, but as two sides of the same coin. We're looking at everything from boosting brand Britain exports to completely overhauling how the government supports the whole sector. Okay, so let's start right where the pain is most immediate: the wallet. The financial pressure on farms right now is just, well, it's absolutely relentless. We can even quantify this. There are figures from the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR. Their forecasts predict that basic input costs for farmers, so things like fuel, energy, feed, will be a staggering 30% higher in 2026 than they were just 6 years before, in 2020. I mean, that kind of margin pressure can just crush small and medium-sized farms.
It's an economic sledgehammer, and the political context just sort of amplifies the damage. The central farming budget for England, that crucial figure of £2.4 billion, has been basically static since 2007. And that means while costs have soared by nearly a third, the underlying funding has never once been adjusted for inflation. It's a fixed resource being asked to cover a cost base that just keeps growing.
Right. So effectively, the state support they're getting has just shrunk in real terms over the last, 15 years?
Yeah.
And if costs are up 30%, that $2.4 billion is buying far, far less.
Yeah.
But it's not just the money, is it? It's the lack of predictability.
That's it exactly. This financial squeeze is compounded by this deep policy instability. And that instability it's fundamentally eroding confidence. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs did its own survey, the 2025 Farmer Opinion Tracker, and the results are, frankly, alarming. 72% of farmers surveyed are not at all confident that changes to schemes will actually lead to a successful future. And maybe even more critically, 65% are not at all confident in DEFRA's ability to even deliver the planned changes efficiently.
Wow. Those confidence numbers are staggering. I mean, if farmers don't trust the delivery mechanism, how can any new policy succeed, no matter how good it is? And we see this distrust play out in specific programs, right?
We do. The policy changes are described in the review as disjointed. A good example is the Sustainable Farming Incentive, or SFI. This is the main government scheme supposed to reward farmers for environmentally friendly practices. But when the SFI closed to new applications in March 2025, the timing and the complexity of the whole transition meant that up to 50% of farmers were left with no access to any funding whatsoever during that gap period.
50%.
Yeah.
That's a massive slice of the industry just left in the lurch.
It felt abandoned, and it completely undermines the very idea of a supportive New Deal.
And that kind of instability must make it impossible to plan for the long term.
Absolutely, and that brings us to the unique challenges for tenant farmers, who are a huge part of the industry. If you only have a short-term tenancy, maybe just 2 or 3 years, why would you invest heavily in things that only pay off over a decade? We're talking about basic things like new fencing, better water supply, or crucially, improving soil health, what they call natural capital.
So the recommendation is a structural fix to the valuations at the end of a tenancy. What does that actually mean for the farmer?
It means that if a tenant farmer invests, say, £10,000 in improving the soil, planting hedgerows, or putting in sustainable water infrastructure, they'd be guaranteed that the value of those investments is recognized and reimbursed when their tenancy ends. It finally makes long-term stewardship financially rational for tenants. And we also have to mention the huge anxiety around the forthcoming changes to inheritance tax, or IHT. Farmers see that relief as absolutely essential for succession, for keeping the farm going across generations. Any threat to it creates profound uncertainty.
Okay, so the lack of profitability at home and all this policy instability means the UK has to urgently look outwards. Let's pivot from the domestic crisis to the global ambition. How does UK farming regain its competitiveness internationally? We've slipped, haven't we? The sources point out that the UK now only produces 65% of the food we buy here, and that's down from 78% back in 1984. That's a big drop.
It's a vulnerability, but it's also an opportunity. The review's ambition is pretty simple. Elevate and grow the unique selling point of brand Britain, a brand that's associated with high quality, high welfare standards. To drive this, they recommend forming the Great British Farm Advisory Board, or GBFAB, and this new board would be tasked with developing a robust strategy to grow UK food and drink exports by 30% by 2030.
That international freight dimension is fascinating, especially when you look at how other countries handle these things. The review highlights best practices. In New Zealand and the USA, you see farmer representatives draw directly into trade negotiations. They specifically mention Zippy Duvall, the president of the American Farm Bureau, actually being present during UK trade delegations.
Well, the benefit is just that the industry is in the room. They can stop policymakers from signing deals that look great on paper but are, impractical or even catastrophic for farming on the ground. The UK needs to emulate this. We need farmer representatives from all 4 devolved nations directly in those trade talks. They need a seat at the table.
And that leads right to the unlevel playing field problem. New free trade agreements, FTAs, they increase access for international producers. The big worry is that these producers are often operating under much lower environmental, welfare, and production standards than our farmers are required to.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the review argues that without intervention, UK domestic production standards could just erode under the economic pressure. It's a race to the bottom. The solution they propose is a cross-departmental task force to establish core standards for all imports. If we're asking British farmers to be world-leading, we have to make sure the food coming into the UK meets a comparable standard.
I think you can feel the consumer frustration around this. A key demand from people who contributed to the review was for clear, transparent labeling. Current legislation is confusing, especially with processed foods. We've all seen the example. You buy a British steak and ale pie made in the UK, but the beef inside could have come from Ireland or anywhere. How do you fix that?
The gold standard for transparency, according to the review, is Australia's system. They use the Australian-made, Australian-grown logo AMAG. This system uses really clear criteria: grown in, produced in, and made in. And, most importantly for processed foods, the logo includes a visual bar chart.
A visual bar chart. That's interesting. What does it actually show you?
Think of it like a nutritional label, but for local content. It immediately visually tells you the percentage of Australian content in the product. So if you see the pie has 60% Australian content, you know exactly what you're supporting. It gives the consumer the power to make an informed choice rather than digging through the small print.
That's simple, actionable transparency. I like it. Okay, finally, in this market solution space, we have the ongoing debate about supply chain fairness. I mean, it's widely recognized that the power imbalance favors supermarkets and processors, which just undermines farmers' ability to get a fair return.
The report supports the work of the existing Grocery Code Adjudicator, the GCA, and the creation of the new Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, or ASCA. The GCA focuses on retailers and their suppliers. The ASCA is needed to look specifically at contracts further up the supply chain, like between processors and farmers.
Well, we've seen similar bodies struggle in the past.
Yeah.
If the ASCA and the GCA don't have the resources or the clear legal power, the teeth, to enforce fair contracts, doesn't that just make this whole idea a bit meaningless?
That's the critical concern, and it's raised in the report itself. The review emphasizes they need clarity on how the two adjudicators will interact. And crucially, they need to be properly resourced and empowered to hold large buyers accountable. Otherwise, the problem of farmers being price takers, not price makers, will just continue to undercut everything.
Let's pivot now from those external pressures to the internal capacity challenge. It's not just about trade and policy, it's about knowledge and skills. And we have a demonstrable skills gap in the sector.
Yeah.
The DEFRA Farm Business Survey from 2022-23 showed that 22% of low-performing farms lack basic business management practices. We're talking about things like financial planning, understanding market trends, or setting clear goals.
This is a major structural weakness. If you want farmers to be profitable business owners, they need the skills. And the review looks abroad for unified support models to tackle this. What's really fascinating is the TGASC model in Ireland. It's Ireland's National Agriculture and Food Development Authority. It's a consolidated system, so it covers research, advice, and training all under one roof.
And how is that structured financially? That seems critical.
It's funded about 60% by the government, but here's the key. It raises the other 40% through its own activities. including fees paid by the 44,000 contracted farmers who get its advisory services. That self-funding mechanism is crucial. It ensures the services stay relevant and accountable to the farmers using them.
So it's not just a top-down bureaucratic thing.
Exactly. And following that, Ireland also has the Green Cert, an agricultural qualification that gives you qualified farmer status. And that, in turn, unlocks financial benefits, like better access to grants and tax reliefs. England currently has no equivalent scheme, which the review strongly recommends piloting. It elevates the profession and it rewards education.
So the proposed UK solution, designed to centralize and simplify all of this, is the Sustainable Farm Service. This is envisioned as a one-stop shop dashboard for the farmer. I mean, if that farmer who wanted to feel valued could access everything in one place, that would be a huge step forward.
A huge step. It would centralize everything. Business advice, access to all those fragmented grant applications, knowledge exchange, and crucial succession planning support. Right now, farmers spend so much time chasing different grant schemes or searching for advice. This single portal would aim to slash that administrative burden and give them back time.
We also need to talk about research and science in future-proofing the industry. The review calls for highly goal-orientated research.
It does. They highlight one specific priority, which they call Soil Shot. This is a suite of R&D programs focused on developing new green fertilizer products. The goal is nutrient recovery, taking waste nutrients like phosphates and ammonia from poultry litter, livestock waste, even sewage sludge, and recycling them into high-quality domestic fertilizers.
That's huge. That would immediately reduce a farmer's reliance on volatile global supply chains for inputs. It directly addresses that 30% cost rise we talked about at the start.
Precisely. It de-risks the input supply, and it closes the circular economy loop at the same time. And finally, we can't ignore basic infrastructure. The report is clear that district network operators must improve rural internet and mobile access. Modern farming relies on data. And there's also a critical call for planning reform to make sure food production is supported, not hindered, by complex planning rules.
Okay, let's connect the farm directly to the fork and discuss the broader social purpose of all this. This is where farming practice really becomes a public health intervention. The UK has a growing health crisis, and it is undeniably linked to diet, high consumption of ultra-processed foods, UPFs, and just too much fat and sugar.
And what's fascinating here is the focus on nutrient density. The report suggests that regenerative farming practices, approaches that focus on improving soil health, can produce food that is measurably more nutrient-rich. If we can link farming practice directly to public health outcomes, the value proposition for farming changes entirely.
So how would we actually incentivize that nutrient density, beyond just telling people it's better for them?
The suggestion is twofold. Incentivize it with price premiums for demonstrably healthier food, and use new tech like handheld nutrient scanners. Imagine if a consumer could scan a carrot and instantly see a superior nutrient profile compared to the one next to it. That creates immediate, visible consumer demand.
Right. That drives market behavior from the bottom up. And this shift towards localized, high-quality food is already showing success in some smaller case studies, isn't it?
It is. Take Liburn Cheese, a small producer in the New Forest. They dramatically increased their revenue by creatively supplying cruise lines that dock at the port of Southampton. They just bypassed the traditional centralized distribution channels and tapped into a local high-volume market.
That's really clever.
And we see the same pattern at places like Ascot Racecourse. They cater for massive events, but they made a conscious pivot to more seasonal menus. They developed new processes specifically to work with smaller artisan suppliers like Watts Farms, overcoming the logistical complexity because consumers appreciated the quality.
What's also fascinating is how public sector buying power procurement can drive this change. The review points to the dynamic food procurement model, or DFP, used in Bath and Northeast Somerset for their school food. What is DFP?
It's a system that allows small local producers to bid on parts of a large contract. So even if you can only supply the apples or maybe just the organic root vegetables, you can still get involved. It allowed small producers to compete on big contracts. And crucially, this model not only supported local producers, but it reduced costs for the school district by 6% after inflation.
Wow, a reduction in cost while sourcing locally seems counterintuitive, but it works.
It works because it enables seasonal substitution. School cooks, knowing they have a dependable local supply chain, can replace expensive imported ingredients. The review uses the example of aubergines with local, seasonal, organic vegetables like carbonara. It's better for the local economy, better for nutrition, and, better for the budget.
So if we connect all these threads back to the beginning, the societal relationship with farming needs a complete overhaul.
It does. It means closing the gap between rural and urban communities and really encouraging whole foods consumption over UPFs. This requires a dedicated consumer campaign and a fundamental transformation of our food culture, moving past the idea that food should just be the cheapest possible commodity. Ultimately, the central theme is that profitability requires certainty in funding, in policy, and in market access. It demands a genuine partnership between government and industry, and a fundamental reset of how society views the people who feed us. Moving past being just a farmer to seeing them as essential environmental managers and public health providers.
And that reset begins where all great changes begin: education. The final, critical takeaway from this monumental report emphasizes that education is vital. It specifically recommends that agriculture be formally included as part of STEM learning science, technology, engineering, and math in schools. And perhaps most tangibly, that learning about a healthy diet and basic cooking from scratch be transformed in the national curriculum. It's about building a generation that understands and values food.
And this leaves us with a provocative thought for you to mull over. Given the established link between farming practice, nutrient density, and the growing public health crisis impacting the UK, if the true cost of diet-related illness on the National Health Service, the NHS, was calculated and factored in, what would this new deal for profitable farming truly be worth to the UK economy far beyond the field?